Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing the book Kluge by Gary Marcus. I'll talk very briefly about the author, talk about what the book is, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and we'll finish off with what I will be reading next time. So, fortunately I don't have a cover this week. I listened to the book on audiobook. But Gary Marcus is a cognitive psychologist. He is a entrepreneur. He's authored several books. He seems like a very intelligent person. I've done research on him a little bit, and it looks like he received his PhD at 23 and has written several nonfiction books, mostly about how the brain works and functions. So this book, Kluge, and the word Kluge comes from the idea that you can have certain it comes, I guess, from the field of engineering mostly, and it's about basically making a solution to a problem where the solution is not specifically designed for whatever that problem is. And the example he gives in the book is the Apollo 13. There was, I believe, an air filtration issue, and the astronauts were able to kludge together a solution to that problem with material they had on hand while they were in space. And so he kind of applies this concept to the human brain and kind of talks about how, as human beings, we have not, or there are parts of our physiology that have not fully developed in a manner to allow to overcome certain biases and certain conflicts that are in kind of the human psychology. He points to some physical things as well. He points to the retina, I believe it would make more sense and be more efficient if the retina was flipped. So in human beings, I guess it's backwards, and if it was flipped forwards, that would allow for more, I think, peripheral vision. And so he kind of talks about where we are as far as evolutionary. This part of the book's relatively short, but he kind of talks about certain things and kind of explains that concept of how we haven't fully evolved in terms of perfection of some of these things. And so in applying that concept to the brain, he talks about kind of some of the places where human memory is kind of short-shifted, and he kind of points to several different studies of how human memory is not the same thing as, I guess he calls it post memory or postal code memory, I think is what he refers to, which is basically like computing. So if you were to retrieve something from a computer, it would come up exactly as you searched it. He said human memory is much more contextual, and it's the reason that you can be thinking of a song and remember a person and then remember a place, and it kind of moves in that direction. And he kind of talks about how the certain short-sightedness as far as gaps in the memory and how memory is malleable and things of that nature. I thought that section was pretty interesting. He also kind of talks about and I think he approaches it more from a evolutionary psychology background. So I know that there are definitely people out there who are skeptics of evolutionary psychology. And if you're one of those people, you may have some disagreements with some of the things he says. He published this book, I believe, in 2008, so some of the information may be dated. But as far as I can tell, there's references to several different studies throughout it. The other section that I thought was interesting was as far as the deliberative process of decision-making versus the emotional process of decision-making, and how those two things are in conflict, and how human beings, the evolution of human beings through back when people were hunter-gatherers on the savannah and all that stuff, and how that lifestyle is in conflict with how people live today. So I thought that stuff was pretty interesting. It's a relatively short book. I think I listened to this on audiobook. I think it was about 6 hours. And I think his writing is clear enough. My issues with the book was I didn't really find a whole lot of new stuff there or super interesting stuff. I thought kind of the parts that I mentioned were interesting, but those are kind of things that I think I've read in other places. But I think that his writing is clear, I didn't find it as gripping as someone like a Malcolm Gladwell or even a Dan Ariely on that level. It's kind of written in the same vein as those guys. Dan Ariely, especially when I didn't finish Rationally Irrational, or I think that's what the title of that book is. Unfortunately, I never finished it, but when I started reading that book, the writing style there was very reminiscent of this writing style with Gary Marcus and Kluge. I thought that the last section of the book where he tries to kind of summarize everything dragged on a little bit too long, and I think he kind of went into subjects that I didn't really see the direct connection with his thesis and kind of that section of the book. But if you are someone who I'd recommend the book to, if you are someone who likes, if you've read the works of Malcolm Gladwell and you've read the works of Dan Ariely, you may want to check this out. Like I said, I don't think there's a whole ton of stuff that's new there, but I think it's kind of a good introduction to Gary Marcus's stuff. I haven't read the rest of his work, so I can't speak to it for certain, but I think that the book is kind of short enough, and you kind of get a sense of his writing style and what he is about. I also will say, if you haven't read, Timothy D. Wilson is a psychologist who was working at the University of Virginia. I don't know if he's still there, but he wrote a book about 15 years ago called Strangers to Ourselves. And Timothy Wilson is cited in this book, and he's also been cited in some of Gladwell's stuff as well. He's someone who his name doesn't seem to get as much recognition as those other guys. So I will throw out, if you get a chance, and if you have read this book before, and you haven't read Strangers to Ourselves by Timothy D. Wilson, I would recommend checking that out, because I think it's a little old. I think that book came out in the early 2000s, but I really enjoyed it when I read it. And for me, at least, the examples of the main thesis of that kind of carried a little bit stronger than kind of Kluge did. It kind of kept my attention a little bit better. So the concept is a little bit different, but if you're a fan of Ariely, if you're a fan of Gladwell, if you read this and you like this, but you haven't read Timothy D. Wilson, I definitely would check that out. So that is Kluge. Next time I'm going to be reviewing Black Hammer, which is a comic book. So I'll be reviewing the first 4 trades of that. Until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll have my Twitter handle below if you want to follow me on Twitter. And if you have read Kluge, I'd be curious to see what your thoughts on it are. So please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.